At a family reunion, my mother shouted to my daughter as she was studying, "We need you to clean the dishes, come down at once." My daughter said respectfully, "Could you please ask Jasmine? She's on the couch using her phone." My sister stood up, grabbed the book, ripped it apart, then grabbed my daughter by the ear and said, "Get to work. How dare you talk about Jasmine?" When I confronted them, my mother shouted at me, "What are you looking at? Go start cooking, your sister's family is hungry." Dad added, "Some people need to learn their place in this house." I stayed calm, and moments later when I told my husband what happened, what he did next made them regret it all. I never thought a family reunion would turn into the most satisfying moment of my life, but here we are. My name is Marissa, and I'm about to tell you how my husband Daniel turned what should have been a peaceful weekend into the most epic payback my toxic family has ever experienced. The annual Peterson family reunion was supposed to be held at my parents' lake house in Michigan, like it had been for the past 15 years. This year felt different from the moment we arrived. My sister Renee had always been the golden child, but lately, her entitlement had reached astronomical levels. She'd moved back in with our parents after her divorce, bringing her 18-year-old daughter Jasmine with her, and somehow this had elevated her status in the family hierarchy to Queen Bee. My daughter Mackenzie, who's 17 and has been working her butt off to get into Stanford, had brought her SAT prep books and planned to study during the downtime. She's always been responsible and driven, unlike her cousin Jasmine, who seemed to have mastered the art of doing absolutely nothing while looking like she was busy on her phone. The first sign of trouble came Friday evening. We'd just finished dinner, and the kitchen was a disaster zone. Plates were stacked everywhere, pots and pans covered the stove, and the dining room table looked like a tornado had hit it. Mackenzie had excused herself to go upstairs and study, as she'd been doing every evening for months in preparation for her college applications. That's when my mother, Gloria, decided to make her grand announcement. "Mackenzie," she shouted up the stairs, her voice carrying that particular tone that meant business. "We need you to clean the dishes, come down at once." I was in the living room, helping my father organize some old photo albums, when I heard Mackenzie's polite response from upstairs, "Could you please ask Jasmine? She's on the couch using her phone." The silence that followed was deafening. I looked over at Jasmine, who was indeed sprawled across the entire couch, scrolling through TikTok with her earbuds in, completely oblivious to the chaos around her. She hadn't lifted a finger to help with dinner preparation or cleanup, which was pretty much her standard operating procedure. What happened next will be burned into my memory forever. Renee shot up from her chair like a rocket, her face twisted with indignation. "How dare she?" she snarled, stomping toward the stairs. I followed, sensing trouble, and watched in horror as my sister burst into Mackenzie's room. Mackenzie was sitting at the small desk, her SAT prep book open, highlighter in hand, completely focused on a practice math section. She looked up with surprise as Renee barged in. "What did you just say about my daughter?" Renee demanded, her voice shaking with rage. I just asked if Jasmine could help with the dishes since I'm studying," Mackenzie replied, clearly confused by the hostility. That's when Renee completely lost it. She grabbed Mackenzie's book, a $50 SAT prep guide that we'd bought specifically for this test, and ripped it in half. The sound of tearing pages filled the room as my daughter watched in shock, her months of notes and highlighted sections destroyed in seconds. But Renee wasn't done. She grabbed Mackenzie by the ear and yanked her up from the chair, causing my daughter to cry out in pain. "Get to work. How dare you talk about Jasmine?" Renee screamed, dragging my daughter toward the door. I stepped in immediately, putting myself between Renee and Mackenzie. "What the hell is wrong with you?" I demanded, pulling Mackenzie behind me protectively. "You just destroyed her study materials and physically assaulted her." That's when my mother appeared in the doorway, and instead of being horrified by what she just witnessed, she turned her fury on me. "What are you looking at?" she shouted, her face red with anger. "Go start cooking, your sister's family is hungry." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Mom, did you see what just happened?" Renee I don't want to hear it. Gloria cut me off. "Mackenzie needs to learn to help out around here instead of hiding in her room with those books all the time. Jasmine's been working hard all day." Working hard? Jasmine hadn't moved from that couch except to go to the bathroom and grab snacks. Meanwhile, Mackenzie had helped serve dinner, cleared her own plate, and had been nothing but respectful to everyone. My father appeared behind my mother, and I hoped for a moment that he'd be the voice of reason. Instead, he looked directly at me and said with cold authority, "Some people need to learn their place in this house." The message was clear. In this family, Mackenzie and I were second-class citizens. Renee's family came first, and we were expected to serve them without question. I stayed calm, which surprised even me. Inside, I was seething, but I knew that losing my temper would only make things worse for Mackenzie. Instead, I helped my daughter gather the torn pieces of her book and led her downstairs to where Daniel was sitting on the back porch, enjoying what he thought was a peaceful evening. "We need to talk," I said quietly, sitting down beside him. Daniel took one look at my face and immediately put down his beer. "What happened?" I told him everything. How Renee had destroyed Mackenzie's study materials, grabbed her by the ear, and screamed at her for simply suggesting that Jasmine help with chores. How my mother had defended Renee and ordered me to cook for Renee's family. How my father had basically told us we were servants in this house. Daniel listened in complete silence, his jaw getting tighter with each detail. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the lake. "Where's Mackenzie now?" he asked finally. "Upstairs, trying to tape her book back together," I replied, my voice breaking slightly. Daniel stood up, and I saw something in his expression that I'd never seen before. My husband is typically the most laid-back, peaceful person you could ever meet. He's a software engineer who solves problems with logic and patience. But right now, he looked like he was capable of moving mountains. "Pack our bags," he said calmly. "We're leaving in the morning." "Daniel, we can't just..." "Yes, we can. And we will." He pulled out his phone and started typing. "But first, I'm going to hire someone to help me understand exactly what they've done." I watched as Daniel spent the next hour on his phone, making calls to a private investigator he'd worked with on some corporate security issues. He was methodical, calm, and completely focused. When I asked what he was doing, he just said, "Getting professional help." The next morning, Renee came downstairs around 10, expecting breakfast to be waiting for her. Instead, she found Daniel sitting at the kitchen table with his laptop, looking like he'd been up all night. "Where's breakfast?" she asked with her usual entitled tone. "I don't know," Daniel replied without looking up. "Where's your apology to my daughter?" Renee scoffed. "Apology? For what?" That girl needed to learn some respect. "Respect," Daniel repeated slowly, finally looking up from his screen. Interesting choice of words. My parents appeared a few minutes later, and my mother immediately started in on the breakfast situation. "Marissa, what's taking so long? Renee's family needs to eat." "Actually," Daniel said, closing his laptop and standing up, "there's something you all need to know." The room fell silent. Daniel rarely spoke up during family conflicts, preferring to let me handle my own relatives. But when he did speak, people listened. "Last night, I had a private investigator look into some things," he continued, his voice eerily calm. "I looked into the property records for this house, the one you've been calling the family home for years." My father straightened up. "What's your point, Daniel?" "My point is that this house isn't actually yours anymore, is it, Daniel?" The color drained from my father's face. My mother looked confused, but Renee had gone very still. "I don't know what you're talking about," my father said, but his voice had lost all its authority. Daniel pulled out a folder from his laptop bag. "According to the county records, this house was remortgaged 3 times in the past 5 years. The final foreclosure notice was filed 6 months ago. The bank has owned this property since March." The silence was deafening. My mother's mouth fell open, and Renee looked like she was about to be sick. "But the family reunion," my mother whispered, "has been taking place in a house that's about to be foreclosed on," Daniel continued. "The investigator also found it interesting that Renee here has been receiving unemployment benefits while claiming to be between jobs for the past 8 months. Except she's not actually looking for work, is she?" Renee's face had gone from white to green. "You have no right to." The investigator also discovered that Jasmine hasn't been enrolled in school for the past semester, Daniel continued relentlessly. "She's 18 years old and should have graduated high school, but instead she's been out of the educational system entirely. That's educational neglect, especially when the parent is collecting government assistance." My father tried to regain control. "This is none of your business, Daniel." "You're right," Daniel agreed. "It wasn't my business. Until you decided to make my daughter's life your business. Until you decided she was beneath your granddaughter. Until you decided to treat my wife like a servant." He pulled out his phone and showed them the screen. "The investigator has been in touch with several people this morning. The bank that holds the mortgage on this house, for starters. They're very interested to learn about the family gatherings happening here while you're behind on payments." My mother looked like she was going to faint. "Daniel, please." The investigator also contacted the county education office, he continued. "They'll be investigating Jasmine's educational situation. And the state unemployment office will be reviewing Renee's benefit claims, especially in light of her failure to maintain her job search requirements." Renee finally exploded. "You can't do this. You have no right." "I have every right to protect my family," Daniel replied, his voice still naturally calm. "The same right you claimed when you destroyed my daughter's property and physically assaulted her." "I didn't assault anyone." Renee protested. Daniel pulled out his phone again. Mackenzie, could you come down here for a minute? Mackenzie appeared at the top of the stairs, looking nervous but determined. As she came down, I noticed she was carrying something. Mackenzie, could you show everyone what you showed me this morning? Daniel asked gently. Mackenzie held up her phone, and I saw that she had taken pictures of her ear, which was still red and swollen from where Renee had grabbed her. She'd also photographed the destroyed book. I documented everything, Mackenzie said quietly. I thought it might be important. My mother started crying. This is all a misunderstanding. No, Daniel interrupted. This is exactly what it appears to be. 3 adults bullying a 17-year-old girl for having the audacity to suggest that her cousin help with chores. He turned to address the whole room. Here's what's going to happen. We're leaving now. Mackenzie and I are going to go buy her a new SAT prep book, and she's going to continue studying for the test that will determine her future. Meanwhile, you're going to figure out how to clean up the massive mess you've made of your own lives. My father tried one last time to assert dominance. You can't just... Actually, I can, Daniel said, pulling out another document. I've already spoken with the police about filing charges for assault and destruction of property. They suggested I start with a restraining order, which I can have filed Monday morning. The room erupted in chaos. Renee started screaming about how we were destroying the family. My mother was sobbing about how this was all a misunderstanding. My father was trying to maintain some dignity while obviously panicking about the foreclosure information. Through it all, Daniel remained completely calm. You have a choice, he said, raising his voice slightly to be heard over the chaos. You can apologize to Mackenzie right now, sincerely and completely, and we can part ways without any legal action. Or you can continue to act like the bullies you are, and I'll follow through on every single threat I've made. Renee looked like she wanted to continue fighting, but my mother grabbed her arm. Renee, please, she whispered urgently. My father, meanwhile, had slumped into a chair, looking every one of his 72 years. How did you find out about the house? He asked quietly. Property records are public information, Daniel replied. I'm surprised none of your neighbors mentioned seeing bank representatives here. Or maybe they did, and you've been hiding it from the family. The truth was written all over my father's face. They'd been keeping the foreclosure secret, probably hoping to figure out a solution before anyone found out. The family reunion had been their way of maintaining the facade that everything was normal. We were going to tell everyone, my mother said weakly. We just needed more time. Time for what? Daniel asked. Time to figure out how to make it Mackenzie's responsibility to fix your financial problems? Time to train her to be your unpaid servant so you could save money on housekeeping? It was a harsh assessment, but as I looked around the room, I realized it might not be far from the truth. How many times had Mackenzie been volunteered for extra chores while Jasmine sat on the couch? How many times had I been expected to cook and clean while Renee was treated like a guest in her own parents' home? Jasmine, who had been silent throughout this entire confrontation, finally spoke up. I didn't know any of this was happening, she said quietly. I would have helped with the dishes. And I want to go back to school. I never wanted to drop out. I looked at my niece with new eyes. She was 16, the same age I'd been when I'd started working my first job. She'd been raised in this environment of dysfunction, taught that she was special and didn't need to contribute. But maybe she wasn't as spoiled as I'd thought. Maybe she was just a kid who'd never been given the chance to be responsible. Jasmine, Daniel said gently, this isn't your fault. You're not responsible for the adults in your life. Renee, however, was still fighting. You think you're so much better than us, she spat. With your fancy job and your perfect little family. No, Daniel replied. I think I'm different from you. I think I treat people with respect, especially children. I think I take responsibility for my actions instead of blaming everyone else for my problems. He turned to Mackenzie. Sweetheart, do you have everything you need upstairs? Mackenzie nodded. I already packed. Good girl. Daniel looked back at my family. We're leaving now. If you want to salvage any relationship with us, you know what needs to happen. As we headed toward the door, my mother called out desperately, Marissa, please don't do this. We're family. I turned back to look at her. Family doesn't treat each other the way you treated my daughter yesterday. Family doesn't prioritize one child over another. Family doesn't destroy a kid's study materials and then demand she serve them dinner. But where will you go for Christmas? My mother asked, as if that was the most pressing concern. Somewhere we're actually welcome, I replied. Somewhere Mackenzie is treated with respect. As we loaded our bags into the car, I could hear them arguing through the open windows. Renee was screaming at my parents about how this was all their fault. My father was yelling about how we had no right to threaten them. My mother was crying about how the family was falling apart. But as Daniel started the engine and we pulled away from the lake house, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years when leaving my parents' place: relief. "Dad," Mackenzie said from the back seat, "thank you." Daniel looked at her in the rearview mirror. "You don't need to thank me for protecting you, sweetheart. That's what family does." "But what about the legal stuff?" Mackenzie asked. "Are you really going to file charges?" "Only if I have to," Daniel replied. "I hope they'll realize that respecting you is more important than their pride." 3 days later, I received a text from my mother: "We're sorry about what happened. Renee wants to apologize to Mackenzie." I showed the message to Daniel, who just shook his head. "Too little, too late." "What do you mean?" I asked. "I mean that a real apology would have come immediately, not after 3 days of thinking about the consequences," he replied. "They're not sorry about what they did. They're sorry about getting caught." He was right, of course. Over the next few weeks, I received several more messages from various family members, all trying to smooth things over and get us to forgive and forget. But none of them addressed the fundamental issue: Mackenzie had been treated like a second-class citizen in her own family, and that was completely unacceptable. The most revealing message came from Renee herself. About a week after the confrontation: "I'm sorry Mackenzie got her feelings hurt, but she really shouldn't have talked back to Grandma like that." Even in her apology, Renee was blaming Mackenzie for the incident. There was no acknowledgement that asking Jasmine to help with chores was reasonable. No recognition that destroying someone's property was wrong. No understanding that physically grabbing a child was assault. But Daniel wasn't done with his investigation. Over the next few weeks, the private investigator continued digging deeper into my family's situation, and what he found was even more disturbing than the initial discoveries. "Marissa, you need to see this," he said one evening, calling me over to his computer. "The investigator has been looking into Renee's financial history, and there's something you should know." On his screen was a series of documents that painted a picture of systematic deception. Renee hadn't just been collecting unemployment benefits while not looking for work. She'd been running a small cash business doing hair and nails out of my parents' basement, earning unreported income while claiming to be destitute. "She's been posting on social media about her side hustle," Daniel said, showing me Renee's Facebook page. "Look at these posts from the past 6 months." I scrolled through photos of Renee doing elaborate nail art, hairstyling, and even some basic makeup services. The posts were tagged with prices and included testimonials from satisfied customers. She'd been making decent money, probably enough to support herself and Jasmine, but she'd been hiding it from the government to keep her benefits. "This isn't just unemployment fraud," Daniel continued. "This is tax evasion. She's been operating a business without reporting the income or paying taxes on it." The scope of the deception was staggering. Renee had been portraying herself as a struggling single mother who needed family support, while actually running a profitable business and collecting government assistance she wasn't entitled to. "But that's not the worst part," Daniel said grimly. "Look at this." He pulled up another document, this one from the school district. Jasmine hadn't just been absent from school for a semester. She'd been pulled out of her regular high school during her senior year and was supposed to be enrolled in an adult education program to complete her diploma. But Renee had never completed the enrollment process, leaving Jasmine in educational limbo just months before graduation. "She's been telling people that Jasmine needed to take a break from school due to stress," Daniel explained. "But there's no record of any formal evaluation or medical documentation. She's been using this as an excuse to collect additional benefits while Jasmine misses her senior year." I felt sick. Jasmine was a bright girl who'd always done well in school. The idea that Renee had been using fake stress claims to avoid dealing with Jasmine's education was horrifying, especially since Jasmine was so close to graduating. "Daniel, we have to do something about this," I said. "Jasmine doesn't deserve to have her education destroyed because of Renee's scams." "I agree," he replied. "But I wanted to talk to you first before I take any action. This is going to get ugly." Meanwhile, Mackenzie had been quietly processing everything that had happened at the reunion. She'd always been mature for her age, but the incident with Renee had forced her to confront some harsh realities about her extended family. "Mom," she said one evening as we were making dinner together, "I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me." "Of course, sweetheart. What is it?" "Has Grandma always treated you the way she treated me that day?" The question hit me like a punch to the gut. Mackenzie had always seen my parents as loving grandparents who occasionally played favorites, but she'd never witnessed the full extent of the family dysfunction. "What do you mean?" I asked, though I knew exactly what she meant. "I mean, has she always expected you to do all the work while Renee gets treated like a princess? Has she always acted like you're less important than Renee?" I sat down at the kitchen table, suddenly feeling exhausted. "Yes, I admit it. It's been like that since we were kids." Mackenzie sat down across from me, her expression serious. Why didn't you ever say anything? Because I thought it was normal, I replied. I thought all families had these dynamics. I thought maybe I really was less important, or less deserving of respect. That's awful, Mom. You know that's not true, right? Looking at my daughter, this confident, accomplished young woman who'd never once doubted her own worth, I realized that I'd spent decades accepting treatment that I would never tolerate for her. I'm starting to understand that now, I said. Watching how they treated you made me see how they've always treated me. And Dad won't let them get away with it, Mackenzie said with satisfaction. I've never seen him like that before. He was so calm, but also so dangerous. She was right. Daniel had shown a side of himself that I'd never seen before. He'd been methodical, thorough, and absolutely ruthless in his pursuit of justice for Mackenzie. It had been both terrifying and incredibly attractive. Your stepfather loves you very much, I said. He's not going to let anyone hurt you, including my family. I know, Mackenzie replied. And I love him for it. But Mom, what about Jasmine? She's stuck in the middle of all this. This was a question that had been haunting me. Jasmine was Renee's daughter, but she was also an innocent victim of her mother's schemes. She'd been raised to believe she was special and didn't need to contribute to the household, but she'd also been denied a proper education and social development. I've been thinking about that too, I said. Maybe we should try to reach out to her directly. Mackenzie's eyes lit up. Really? Could we do that? I don't know if Renee would allow it, but we could try. That weekend, Mackenzie surprised me by asking if she could use my phone to call Jasmine. I was nervous about the potential fallout, but I also knew that Mackenzie had always been a good judge of character. Jasmine? It's Mackenzie, she said when her cousin answered. I was wondering if you wanted to talk. I couldn't hear Jasmine's side of the conversation, but I watched Mackenzie's expressions change as they talked. There was surprise, then concern, then something that looked like determination. Would you like to come visit us for a weekend? Mackenzie asked. I know things are complicated with our families right now, but that doesn't mean we can't be friends. After Mackenzie hung up, she turned to me with a thoughtful expression. Mom, I think Jasmine is more aware of what's going on than we realized. She knows her mom hasn't been honest about things, and she's really upset about missing school. What did she say exactly? She said that Renee told her she was too stressed to go to school, and that they were going to do homeschooling instead. But Renee never actually set up any homeschooling program. Jasmine's been spending most of her time on her phone because she literally has nothing else to do. This was even worse than I'd imagined. Jasmine wasn't lazy or entitled, she was trapped in a situation where she had no structure, no goals, and no way to take control of her own life. She also said that Renee has been having her help with a hair and nail business, but she's been telling Jasmine that they can't tell anyone about it because people wouldn't understand, Mackenzie continued. Jasmine's been feeling like she's doing something wrong, but she doesn't know what. The picture was becoming clearer. Renee had been using Jasmine as unpaid labor for her illegal business while also using her as a prop to collect benefits. Jasmine had been isolated from her peers, denied an education, and made complicit in her mother's fraudulent activities. Did you invite her to visit? I asked. I did, but I don't think Renee will let her come, Mackenzie replied. Jasmine seemed really scared about getting in trouble. That evening, Daniel came home with more news. I've been in contact with an educational advocate, he said. I explained the situation with Jasmine's schooling, and they're going to help us understand her options for completing her high school diploma. Is that going to cause problems for Jasmine? I asked, worried about the potential consequences. It might cause problems for Renee, Daniel replied. But Jasmine needs to be in school. She's 16 years old, and she's been out of the educational system for months. That's not just truancy, it's educational neglect. What does that mean exactly? It means that Renee could face serious legal consequences for denying Jasmine an education during her senior year. And Jasmine needs to know that she has options to complete her diploma and move forward with her life. The implications were staggering. If the investigation found that Renee was an unfit guardian, Jasmine could end up in a difficult situation. But if it motivated Renee to get her act together, Jasmine might finally get back on track with her education and graduate. There's something else, Daniel continued. I've been in touch with a lawyer about the assault charges against Renee. Mackenzie's ear injuries were documented, and the destruction of property was witnessed by multiple people. We have a strong case if we want to pursue it. Do you think we should? I asked. I think we should keep it as an option, Daniel replied. If Renee continues to avoid taking responsibility for her actions, we may need to pursue legal remedies. Over the next few days, the situation with my family continued to escalate. My mother called repeatedly, alternating between begging us to forgive and forget and trying to guilt-trip us into backing down from our demands for accountability. Marissa, you're destroying this family, she said during one particularly emotional call. Renee is falling apart, and your father is having chest pains from all the stress. Mom, we're not destroying anything, I replied. We're simply refusing to accept being treated badly. If that's destroying the family, then maybe the family needed to be destroyed. But what about Jasmine? She's just a child. She doesn't deserve to be punished for her mother's mistakes. You're right, she doesn't, I agreed. That's why we're trying to help her get back into school and have some stability in her life. By threatening to send her mother to jail? By holding her mother accountable for her actions, I corrected. Renee chose to commit fraud. Renee chose to pull Jasmine out of school during her senior year. Renee chose to assault Mackenzie. These are consequences, not punishments. My mother's calls became increasingly desperate as it became clear that we weren't going to back down. She tried enlisting other family members to pressure us, but most of them were staying out of the conflict once they learned the full scope of Renee's deception. My uncle Walter, Renee's godfather, called me directly after my mother had asked him to intervene. Marissa, I just heard about what's been going on, he said. I want you to know that I think you're handling this exactly right. Really? I was surprised. Uncle Walter had always been close to Renee. Really? I've been worried about Renee for years, but I didn't realize how bad things had gotten. She needs professional help, not enablers. What do you think about Jasmine's situation? I think that girl needs to be in school, and she needs some stability in her life. If Renee can't provide that, then other arrangements need to be made. Uncle Walter's support was meaningful, but it also highlighted how isolated my parents had become in their defense of Renee's behavior. Even her longtime supporters were starting to recognize that the situation was unsustainable. The breakthrough came about 3 weeks after the reunion incident. Jasmine called Mackenzie directly, crying and asking for help. Mackenzie, I need to talk to your mom, she said. Something's happening, and I don't know what to do. When I got on the phone, Jasmine was barely coherent through her tears. Aunt Marissa, there are people here asking my mom questions about money and school, and she's screaming at them, and I'm scared. The investigation had begun, and Renee was apparently not handling it well. Jasmine had been in the house when the investigators arrived, and she'd witnessed her mother's complete meltdown. Jasmine, where are you right now? I asked. I'm in my room, but I can hear everything. They're saying something about my diploma and benefits, and my mom is crying and yelling. Sweetheart, these people are just trying to make sure you get the chance to finish school, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. You're 18 now, which means you can make your own decisions about your education. But what if my mom gets in trouble? What if I can't afford to go back to school? Jasmine, you're not going to be alone in this, I assured her. There are programs to help people in your situation, and you have family who cares about you. After I hung up, I looked at Daniel. We need to do something. I know, he replied. I've already called the educational advocate. She's aware that Jasmine has family support available and wants to help her explore her options for completing her diploma. What does that mean exactly? It means that Jasmine can get her GED, enroll in adult education classes, or even return to a different high school to finish her senior year. She has choices, and she doesn't have to let Renee's problems derail her future. I stared at him. Are you serious? Completely serious. Mackenzie suggested it, actually. She said Jasmine shouldn't have to pay for her mother's mistakes. Looking back, I realized that this was the moment when everything changed. Not just for Jasmine, but for our entire family dynamic. Instead of allowing Renee's chaos to victimize another generation, we were stepping in to break the cycle. But what about Renee? I asked. She's not going to just let Jasmine make her own decisions about school. Renee doesn't have a choice, Daniel replied grimly. Jasmine is 18. She's legally an adult. And Renee's about to be charged with multiple felonies. She's going to have bigger problems than controlling Jasmine's education. Daniel showed me something else the investigator had discovered. Jasmine had been accepted to a community college program but hadn't enrolled because Renee had told her they couldn't afford it and she needed to help with the family business. Meanwhile, Mackenzie had been working a part-time job all summer to save money for college applications, in addition to her intense study schedule. They were setting Jasmine up for failure, Daniel said. And they were trying to drag Mackenzie down with her. The most satisfying part of this whole story came about 2 months later. I received a call from my cousin Jennifer, who lived in the next town over from my parents. Marissa, I don't know what happened at the reunion, she said, but I wanted you to know that Renee applied for a job at my company, and when we called for references, some very interesting information came up. It turned out that Daniel's research had been more thorough than I'd realized. Renee's potential employers had been made aware of her extended unemployment and her failure to maintain her job search requirements. Word was spreading through their small town about the family's financial troubles. Also, Jennifer continued, Jasmine enrolled in the adult education program and got her GED last month. She's starting at the community college in January and seems to be doing really well. She asked me to tell you that she's grateful for your family's support. I was glad to hear that Jasmine was taking control of her own life, but I was even more proud of Mackenzie, who had handled the entire situation with remarkable maturity. She'd replaced her destroyed study materials, kept up with her preparation schedule, and ultimately scored in the 95th percentile on her SATs. But the real vindication came 8 months later, when Mackenzie received her acceptance letter to Stanford with a partial scholarship. She'd worked incredibly hard for that achievement, and no one was going to take it away from her. We celebrated with a small family dinner, just the three of us. As we toasted Mackenzie's success, Daniel raised his glass and said, "To people who know their place in this world." Mackenzie laughed. "And where's that, Dad?" "Wherever you choose to be," he replied. "Based on your own merit, your own effort, and your own dreams." Looking back, I realized that the family reunion wasn't really about dishes or studying or even about Renee's entitlement. It was about power and control, about who mattered and who didn't. For years, I allowed my family to treat Mackenzie as less important than Jasmine, and by extension, to treat me as less important than Renee. Daniel's intervention hadn't just protected Mackenzie in that moment, it had reset the entire dynamic. He'd shown my family that there were consequences for their behavior, that Mackenzie had value and deserved respect, and that we wouldn't tolerate being treated as second-class family members. The best part is that Mackenzie saw it all happen. She watched her stepfather research the situation, gather evidence, and methodically dismantle the power structure that had been oppressing her. She learned that she didn't have to accept mistreatment, that she had advocates who would fight for her, and that standing up for yourself doesn't require screaming or violence, just determination and facts. We never went back to another family reunion. My parents eventually lost the house to foreclosure, Renee found a job and moved into her own apartment, and Jasmine completed her associate degree and transferred to a 4-year university on an academic scholarship. As for Mackenzie, she's now in her 2nd year at Stanford, studying computer science like her stepfather. She's confident, successful, and surrounded by people who appreciate her worth. And every time someone asks me about family obligations or keeping the peace, I remember that weekend at the lake house and Daniel's calm voice saying, "Some people need to learn their place in this house." He was right. Our place was anywhere but there.